Terrific. Thanks. Welcome back, everybody, to the full commission meeting of the Commission to Study School Funding. Today's May 11th, 2020 at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And just to start with, anybody have any major issues getting connected to the meeting this afternoon? I think we're in good shape. Jordan, anything to report on access issues?
We had one person who had trouble for a moment, but they're in now, so I think we're good to go.
Okay, terrific.
We've got 10 folks listening in, 11 now.
Okay, fantastic. Thanks very much, Jordan. Let's see. We'll start with just a little bit of meeting protocol. So as Jordan just mentioned, this meeting is going to be recorded, audiovisual, and posted on the Commission website. And before we get started with the meeting, we'll do a roll call of the members. So please indicate your presence and whether or not there's somebody present with you in the room where you're tuning in. And also, as we've noted at last week's meeting, as well as the work group meetings, we won't have a period of public comment, a live period of public comment during this meeting, but please feel free and encouraged to reach out by emailing the School Funding Commission at schoolfunding.commission@unh.edu, or visiting the Commission's website, which is carc.unh.edu/school-funding, and there you can also post comments. So with that, I'll go through and quickly take the roll. Dave Luno reporting from Hopkinton, and only Ozzy the long-haired dachshund with me.
This is Mel Myler from Kentucky. I'm in my home office with no one with me other than myself.
Oh, sorry. Thanks, Mel. Let me go through and call out. Rick Ladd's absent. Dick.
Dick Ames here from Jaffrey, alone in my room.
Thank you. Mary.
Mary Heath, Manchester, home alone.
Jay.
Jay Kahn in Keene, no one else present.
Thank you. John.
John Beardmore, nobody's with me.
Terrific. How about John Morgan?
Oh, sorry.
No, either way. Yes.
That worked well. John Morgan here at my home in Brentwood, and no one in the room currently.
Great. Thank you. Corrine?
Yep. Corrine Cascadden here in my home office in Berlin.
Terrific. Jane?
Jane Bergeron here in Litchfield with my dog Otis.
Dave?
Whoops. Hi, everybody. I'm Dave Ryan here in Exeter at 30 Linden Street, home of SAU 16. No one in the office.
All right. Iris?
Hi. Husband in the other room getting prepared to leave the house.
Thanks. Bill?
Hi, everybody. Bill Ardinger in Concord, New Hampshire. My upstairs room, nobody here. Thank you.
Okay. Susan?
Susan Heward here in Hooksett, all by my lonesome.
Thanks. Barbara?
Barbara Tremblay here in Keene, husband in the other room.
Okie doke. Chris?
Chris Dwyer in my Portsmouth dining room by myself.
All right. Val?
Val Zanchuk, alone in my office in Jaffrey.
All right. So those are the commission members, and we also have Bruce?
Bruce Mallory, present from my home office in Kittery, Maine.
And Jordan?
Jordan Hensley from Dover, just me in the room here.
And let's see, is Michelle joining us today?
Perhaps later. I think she may join us later. We'll acknowledge
Okay.
her.
Okay, and Jennifer as well. I don't see Jennifer on, but she may jump in later as well. Did I miss anybody? Okay, good. That's a good start. let's see, just a couple of opening housekeeping items before we get started. Let's see, we had work groups started this past Thursday, and we'll continue next week. So we're starting this alternating Mondays with commission meetings one Monday, work group meetings the following Monday. The work groups will be staggered so that anybody who wants to attend all of them may do so. Should also note that we're looking to tentatively schedule, or work groups may be looking to tentatively schedule meetings as well, so that they may want to meet multiple times in a week and determine at their first meeting in the week as to whether or not they need the second meeting. So so this prevents a bit of a challenge given remote meetings, because if you dial in and you don't hear anything, it doesn't necessarily tell you that the meeting has been that a meeting's been canceled. So so for tentatively scheduled meetings, we're going to expect that they're, you know, if you see it posted in the legislative calendar, expect that it's going to happen. If it's not going to happen, the work group's going to talk about it prior to that at their work group meeting, and that information will also be posted on the commission website, and we'll also send an update to an email list. So anybody that wants to be on this email list, please email the commission, schoolfunding.commission@unh.edu, ask to be put on the email list, and you'll be kept up to date with any meeting cancellations, so that you can you know, plan your day as effectively as you can. So so that's tentative meetings. I want to just point out that that there's a line of storms coming through New Hampshire this afternoon, and I don't know what's going to happen with power. One or more of us might get knocked off the call. As long as the call stays up, the Zoom conference stays up, then let's continue to proceed and with it, because I think we'll still be able to get you know, move forward. If I get knocked off the call, keep going. Mel and Jay will pick right up and do a much better job, and you'll have a very productive meeting. So so just what contingency there. And then the fourth thing that I wanted to mention is I heard on the news, and I think I saw it on the Boston Globe site this morning, that the Massachusetts Joint House and Senate Committees on Education are going to be holding a remote hearing. It's going to be live streamed Wednesday at 11 o'clock in the morning to talk about the remote learning experience that they're having in Massachusetts. Don't know if it's going to get into budget items, but it you know, we'll I think it would be interesting. I'm going to tune into it, but interesting to hear what they're experiencing down there, and take advantage of that remote live stream. I don't have the connection information on that. I don't know if Jordan, if you have that, or
I don't have it now, but I can get it for folks and send out an email tonight.
Okay, terrific. And that way, anybody that wants to join in, it's open to anybody, is my understanding. So let's see. With that, I don't think we don't have any changes to group agreements. Everybody's got those fresh in their mind. So Bruce, you want to do just a high-level reminder? Oh, can't hear you, Bruce.
Sometimes the space bar will take me off of mute and sometimes it won't. So, so in any case, just that they're on the screen here briefly, just as a quick reminder. Most important thing is to let's do this together and make this entire process productive, listening to what each of us has to say, and let's take some risks sometimes and put ideas out that others will react to, and we'll always respond to the idea, not the person. And then in terms of our online agreements, using hand signals, trying to be on camera, mute when you aren't talking, use chat if you have questions or comments. All of this, again, will be recorded. So I'll get out of that. And we're back to business.
Bruce, I really like that one about taking risks and getting uncomfortable, because I think we do need to challenge ideas, and it doesn't if you bring up an idea, it doesn't necessarily mean that that you're advocating for it or that the commission's advocating for it, but it may be something that we just want to kick around a little bit, and I think that's going to be healthy for the commission. I think it's going to be healthy, especially for the work groups, as they really do the heavy lifting of what we've got ahead of us.
And on that, just the idea of being raggedy, meaning half-baked ideas in our deliberations and conversations are important to introduce. Test an idea, even if it's not all the way thought through. As Dave always reminds us, we're nowhere near putting solutions on the table at this point, but we are asking questions. We're testing what-if kinds of scenarios as we go along. So all of this will help us get there.
Great, great. Before we get into the presentation for this afternoon, 2 sets of minutes were emailed out, and hopefully everybody's had a chance to at least give them a quick look. These are minutes from our March 9th meeting, which seemed like happened a year ago, and but March 9th, 2020, and our meeting from last week, May 4th, 2020. So I'll take a motion to approve the minutes of the March 9th and May 4th meetings, if there is one out there. Someone making that motion?
Move to approve.
All right, has that been seconded?
Seconded.
So moved by Senator Khan, seconded by Representative Myler. Any discussion, changes, alterations, corrections, amplifications anybody wants to make?
Dave, I need to just abstain from March 9. Just wanted to make sure we had, because you have one motion for both sets of minutes, but I'll have 2 votes.
Okay. Okay. Well, we can vote on them independently then. So any further comment? So all in favor of the we have to do roll call votes. All right. So these are going to be 2 motions. Is that all right, Jay and Mel?
I move approval of March 9th meeting.
Second.
All right. So we've got to roll call this. So Mel Myler.
Yes.
Rick, let's see, Dick Ames.
Yes.
Mary Heath.
Yes.
Jay Kahn.
Yes.
John Morgan.
Yes.
Corrine Cascadden. Didn't get you, Corrine. If you do a thumb.
Had to unmute. All right, yes. Yes.
Thanks. Jane Bergeron.
Yes.
Dave Ryan.
Abstain.
Okay. Iris Estabrook.
Yes.
John Beardmore.
Yeah.
Bill Ardinger.
Yes.
Susan Huard.
Yes.
Barbara Tremblay.
Yes.
Chris Dwyer.
Yes.
Val Zanchuk.
Yes.
And Dave Luno votes yes. So, Jordan, were you able to record that?
Yep.
All right. And I'll take a motion to approve the May 4th meeting minutes as presented.
So move.
Second.
Second.
Terrific. Motion made and seconded. Any additional comments on these? All right, we'll go to a roll call vote. Mel Myler.
Yes.
Dick Ames.
Yes.
Mary Heath.
Yes.
Jay Kahn.
Yes.
John Morgan.
Yes.
Corrine Cascadden.
Yes.
Jane Bergeron.
Yes.
David Ryan.
Yes.
Iris Estabrook.
Yes.
John Beardmore.
Yep.
Bill Ardinger.
Yes.
Susan Huard.
Yes.
Barbara Tremblay.
Yes.
Chris Dwyer.
Yes.
Val Zanchuk.
Yes.
Dave Luno votes yes. All right, terrific. So now we get into the meat of our learning during the commission meeting today, and I'd like to welcome Doug Hall and Jeff McLynch to join us on our Zoom AV, and thank you guys very much for taking the time this afternoon and all the effort that you've been putting in and put towards helping us understand school funding issues. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Doug and Jeff. So thanks, guys.
Thank you. Doug, I think you might be muted.
And Bruce, if they need to share with the screen, can they do that?
They should be able to, right, Jordan, they have access to screen share?
Yeah, you guys should be able to.
Yep.
Mr. Chairman, I thank you. I'm going to switch and share my screen. When I do that, I won't be able to see any of you. So it would be helpful, I think, if you can hold questions until the end of the presentation that I and Jeff will do. If things break up for some reason, if somebody shouts, we can wait a second until the internet functions again. But I'm going to switch now to screen share.
Okay, great.
So I'm hoping you can see the first slide in this presentation. Jeff McLynch is going to do the latter part of this. Jeff was hired as the project director for the School Funding Fairness Project just last month. He had been the executive director of the New Hampshire Fiscal Policy Institute in Concord for 6 years. And most recently, he was director of the Massachusetts Coalition for Adult Education. He's held other leadership positions in fiscal policy in New England and in Washington. Our goal this afternoon is to share some of our knowledge and experience regarding the availability and potential usefulness of data for you and your work groups. This presentation is supplemented by the paper that's been distributed to you. This slide is just a map of the material that we will cover. House Bill 4 of the 2019 legislative session created the commission, and that law provides 8 charges to the commission. What we're going to present relate mostly to these 2 of the 8. Determining whether the current school funding formula complies with court decisions regarding adequacy and uniform taxation, and reestablishing the cost of an adequate education by defining what's needed to provide it. Now, as a start, I want to start with an example. At an earlier meeting of the commission that I attended, when you were still meeting in person, the question arose as to how best to measure and account for relative income levels of families that students come from. So the first option is the free and reduced lunch information. You're aware that that's what's used in the current formula. This counts updated annually, so it is current. It's also an actual count. Although we know that in the high school level, students are less likely to apply, even though their family income would make them eligible. Districts that get no cash grants from the current funding system have less budget incentive to find and encourage enrollment of low-income students when compared to those in districts that receive large grants. One other point I would make is in the current system, free and reduced lunch includes 2 different categories of low income. Those of 135% of poverty and below, which receive free meals, and those between 135 and 180%, which receive subsidized meals. So the 2 levels could be used in a formula, not just aggregating into one. A second possible source that had been used some years ago was the census. And very detailed data on family income and poverty for even the smallest communities in New Hampshire were available in the census in 2000 and in the earlier censuses. However, no socioeconomic data was collected in 2010, and none is being collected this year. The census is not going to be of any help. However, the Census Bureau, when it decided to no longer collect that information in the decennial census, created the American Community Survey, called the ACS. As its title states, it's a survey that's conducted annually, but the Census Bureau aggregates 5 years of data into a 5-year summary. This table shows what the ACS reported on families in poverty for 10 New Hampshire towns that I just happened to select. If you take a look, in Alton, it's 4.3%, and in Mason, it's 8.6%. It appears that Mason's rate is double that of Alton. These figures are from a tiny, tiny sample. Like political polls, there's a statistical margin of error that's simply due to who is in the small sample. As you know, a typical political poll will calculate its margin of error to be perhaps plus or minus 0.4% or 4.2%. So what's the margin of error in the ACS for these municipalities? The margin of error is shown on the right. In Alton, the range, given the 95% margin of error, is from 0 to 10.1%. In Mason, it's from 2.5 to 14.7. It's quite possible that Alton's rate is actually higher than that of Mason, although if you look only at the published numbers, the Mason rate would be double that of Alton. There's even a 5% chance that the true figures are outside of these ranges. The Census Bureau itself says that the ACS numbers really should not be used for communities with populations below 85,000. That excludes all New Hampshire municipalities except Manchester and Nashua, and a number of counties as well. This is a similar ACS report. It pretends to state the median family income in each town to the nearest dollar. But again, applying the statistical margin of error, while the median income in Hopkinton on this is $102,422, that's just an estimate based on a small sample. Considering the sampling error, it's likely to be somewhere between 83,000 and 121,000, and there's even a 5% chance that it's outside that range. So what do we recommend that the commission use? If you're going to measure anything about the low-income kids in communities, we recommend using the free reduced meals count. It's an actual count of kids. It's not a survey with large margins of error. The New Hampshire Department of Education will talk about their data. The department has collected a lot of financial and other data from our many school districts for decades. I'm just listing on this slide and the next one the kind of data that the DOE places on its website annually. I don't plan to go over them. The list is in the paper that we provided you, but there's quite a bit that can be useful. You've already had Caitlin Davis present some information on state aid programs, and there's much more that she could present to you. I will, however, raise two examples of issues regarding some DOE data. First, some data that might be useful is not collected. For example, we know from the district's annual budgets, the DOE 25 reports, that fringe benefits for all staff were 25.8% of salaries 20 years ago. And last year, they were nearly double that, 49.4%. That's a huge change. But we don't know how much of that increase is due to health insurance and how much due to increased retirement contributions when the state abandoned its contribution to the teacher's retirement fund. That distinction between those two is not collected by the department. Secondly, some often reported data misrepresents the situation because it's not fully understood. For example, the often quoted spending per pupil data for each school district. Last year, the stated average was $16,346. Those figures, however, do not include transportation, interest on debt, capital items such as HVAC systems, new gym floors, and allocation to charter schools. When you add those in, those add another $2,000 per pupil or more to some district spending per pupil. The DOE states this fact clearly, but it is often not understood by those who cite the DOE's published numbers. The DOE has the data to report those figures, but does not do so. You should ask them to provide that true data. Beyond financial and operational data, the Department of Education also has the results of all student testing that's been done for decades. While there have been regular reports of average results by school or district, the differences in student populations among schools make comparisons problematic. What is the relationship between what a school district can control and achievement of its students? And what is the relationship between what it cannot control and achievement? I was involved in studies of this sort many years ago, and I'll show you some results. They're far out of date. That's not the reason for showing them to you. Simply, they illustrate what should be done before using achievement results to evaluate school performance or include achievement test results in any school funding formula. This simple graph shows the SAT verbal test results from two groups of New Hampshire public school students. One group, the solid line, shows the results of all New Hampshire students whose parents had never completed high school. And the dashed line shows the results for all students for whom at least one parent had received a graduate degree. There's a huge difference. Intermediate levels of parental education showed intermediate results. Without getting into the reasons for the differences, what this shows is that high schools being evaluated on SAT and other achievement test results are missing an important point. Schools in different communities have different student backgrounds. This graph shows the difference in the same SAT verbal scores, but two different groups of New Hampshire students. Students in one group, the solid line, were those from the high schools that were among the highest spending per pupil. The dotted line shows the results for students from the lowest spending. There is a difference. Higher spending schools produce a marginally higher SAT result. This chart combines the two, parental education and school spending. It illustrates the kind of analysis that needs to be done. The solid line is the SAT verbal score average of students in the highest spending high schools, while the dotted line shows the same for students in the lowest spending. At all levels of parental education, the higher spending schools have higher results. The difference between the two spending groups is 10 to 30 points, but the difference from low to high parental education levels is 70 to 90 points. Higher parental education levels are much more important than school spending, but both contribute to high achievement. This kind of analysis can be done quickly using the database of every student that the legislature required the Department of Education to create in 1994, called I4C. I was part of the creation of that database, and I'm sorry to see that it's not being used to inform policy regarding education. I urge the Commission and the DOE to put the I4C system to good use in its work. So for the Department of Education, this is the summary we recommend. There's a lot of good financial and operational data that the DOE can provide, but make sure everyone understands what it is and what is not included in the data. Ask the department to collect additional data that you believe will be important to your work. Push the department to aggregate its student level data in ways that will inform everyone of what factors are important in student outcomes. Now I'm going to turn the rest of this over to Jeff.
Wonderful. Thank you, Doug. And thank you to all the members of the commission for the opportunity to speak with you today. As Doug mentioned, my name is Jeff McLynch, and we both represent the New Hampshire School Funding Fairness Project. And I really just want to emphasize at the outset, we see the work that this commission is doing is absolutely essential to the state's future, and we really look forward to working with all of you as the months progress and as you move closer to your report and to your recommendations. So just to begin, just as the Department of Education has a wealth of information at its disposal that can help inform the Commission's efforts to establish the cost of adequate education, there are two state entities that can be of assistance as you consider a means of financing those costs in a uniform and proportional manner: the Department of Revenue Administration and the Office of the Legislative Budget Assistant. I believe you've heard previously from the DRA Commissioner, and you have a former one in your midst. So you may already have some familiarity with the data the department compiles. But most critically for the Commission's work, the department collects and analyzes and publishes property tax data for every city and town in the state. It also carries out the annual equalization survey, an important process that's needed to ensure that all properties in different towns are taxed for county and SWEP purposes on an equal basis. In addition, and this really speaks to one specific task with which the Commission was charged and which I think was discussed during the Fiscal Policy Work Group meeting last week, towns report to DRA the value of many different types of property, for instance, residential land, commercial buildings, utilities, etc. And while there are limits to these data, for instance, they don't capture rental residences as a different category, those data could allow the Commission to explore the use of different tax rates for the so-called Class A, B, and C properties that are envisioned in the Commission's enabling legislation. And that kind of approach is permitted under an amendment to the New Hampshire Constitution that was adopted in 1968. Just as importantly as the data it collects, the department has to some degree the analytical capability to assess the revenue impact of various tax policy changes, whether modifications to existing methods of taxation, the reinstatement of prior methods, or the introduction of new ones. In fact, as many of the members of the Commission know well, in particular members of the legislature, when tax-related legislation is introduced, the analysis that the DRA conducts is incorporated into what is known as the fiscal note for that measure in order to provide representatives and senators and others with a sense of how much revenue that measure might raise or lose and how different taxpayers might be affected by that change. In anticipation of the work the Commission will do throughout this year, we urge you to ask DRA now to collect any fiscal notes it has produced and to update them with more current data wherever possible. Doing that now will increase the likelihood that this library of analysis will be available to the Commission when it's ready to draw upon it, as it sets its recommendations. So we would argue that the Commission make a similar request of the Office of Legislative Budget Assistant, or LBA. Now, again, some members of the Commission know the LBA and its staff quite well, but for those who do not, the LBA is an office within and answerable to the New Hampshire Legislature that provides technical assistance on finance, accounting, and budgetary matters, not only to individual members of the legislature and standing legislative committees like Finance or Ways and Means, but also to special study committees and commissions such as this one. So among its many responsibilities, and there are many, and you'll see LBA staff at all hours of the day and night working hard at this, the LBA oversees the fiscal note process I alluded to a moment ago. While the DRA conducts many of the analyses that make their way into the fiscal notes, other entities, such as the Liquor Commission or the Lottery Commission, provide information to LBA as well. So the LBA too has on file the fiscal notes prepared for the scores of revenue proposals that legislators have put forward over the years. Again, we recommend that the commission ask the LBA to create a compendium of this information and update it to the extent possible. And we would add that, you know, such a request could come directly from legislative members of the commission to try to expedite the process along the way. So there are a couple other data sources we wanted to touch upon before bringing our presentation today to a close. The first of which is the Office of Strategic Initiatives, which is a successor entity to the Office of State Planning. OSI is required by statute to produce annual estimates of the population of each city and town in New Hampshire. And while they are estimates, they are probably among the best available to you. The 2019 estimates should be available, I believe, in August of this year, although if other responsibilities have come to bear in response to the pandemic, there might be a delay, but typically they're released in August. OSI also has access to a geographic information system that might be able to shed light on an issue that was raised during, I think it was the adequacy work group meeting last week, and that is the total road mileage that school buses might have to travel in a given district, and by extension, the transportation costs that different districts might face. Two other sources that the commission might wish to draw upon would be the University System of New Hampshire and the Community College System, both of which have compiled data on some graduates of New Hampshire high schools. While the enrollment in any given community college is highly related to where a high school graduate might live, there are indicators that they have available that could be used to determine the relative success of new graduates from different high schools. Similarly, USNH regularly tabulates applications, admissions, and enrollments by high school. And they could also tabulate, say, for instance, freshman GPA for students from New Hampshire or counts of students receiving certain academic awards. Comparing those across high schools could provide some sense of how well each high school has prepared its recent graduates for college. And then the final point that we want to emphasize to all of you is that to supplement the information that's available within New Hampshire, we certainly encourage the commission to continue to avail itself of the resources that multi-state entities like the NCSL and the Education Commission on the states that you've heard from already can provide, and to learn from the experiences of other states that have reshaped their approaches to financing public education. So for instance, if the DRA or LBA is unable to estimate the impact of a particular tax policy change, either in sufficient detail or in the time that you need it, there are a number of highly regarded public policy research centers to which you might be able to turn. So for instance, the New England Public Policy Center, which is part of the Boston Federal Reserve Bank, the Urban Institute's State and Local Finance Initiative, and then there are multiple initiatives within the Pew Charitable Trusts, all of which have substantial expertise in state level public finance and tax policy, and have conducted research here in the region and across the country that you might be able to draw upon. And there are certainly other institutes as well. Likewise, we'd suggest the commission invite officials and experts from neighboring states to share their insights. Representative Luno, you alluded to the hearing that's going to occur in Massachusetts later this week. Massachusetts, as some may know, completed its own foundation budget review commission not too long ago. I think some of the information is still current. And they considered many of the same issues, such as special education or assistance to children from low-income families and communities that are before this commission as well. So that's our presentation for the day, but really, Doug and I both want to thank you for the chance to be here today. And we're happy to try to answer any questions you might have now or once our presentation and today's meeting is done in the future. And to that end, these are email addresses, and it's probably the best way to reach us. If we were able to meet in person, trust me, you'll see me at just about every meeting, and you're more than welcome to just grab me and ask a question then. So let's look forward to a day when that can occur again.
Dave, you're muted. There you go.
Yeah. And no, I just discovered that. So Thanks, Jeff. Thanks, Doug, very much for that. I've got just a couple of quick questions before I open it up to everybody. But Doug, I guess this first one's to you, and I think you made your point. Made the point that that we need to carefully inspect the data that we're looking at to make sure that that it's reasonable in terms of its the techniques that were used to collect it and what the 95% confidence level is on it. But in the first set of data, when we're looking at the poverty percentages of a certain group of towns, I wasn't sure if the confidence level was essentially a margin of error in terms of actual percentage points, or in terms of a percentage of the data.
It's a percentage, so that if it was 5% plus or minus 5%, it would be from 0 to 10. So
to me, that means it's actually in actual points as opposed to a percentage.
Yes.
Because in the median median household income data that you were looking at?
Yes.
That seemed to be reflected more as a percentage as opposed to.
No, those were actual numbers, upper limit and lower limit.
Okay.
The point of that presentation, though, is please don't use the ACS, because as the Census Bureau itself says, populations below 85,000. There are towns in New Hampshire, I will tell you this, there are towns in New Hampshire where over the 5-year period, not one person was ever in the survey. So how do they come up with a number? They grab numbers from other communities nearby and come up with a formula that sort of calculates what maybe it is. The whole thing for this kind of use, where you have school districts that have populations of 2,000, 5,000, 10,000, they're just not useful numbers, and you would be misaligning a lot of communities if you use those numbers.
Okay, that's the bigger point that I got out of that too. So thanks for clarifying that, Doug. And Jeff, you mentioned that you felt it would be important for us now to collect the fiscal notes that the DRA and LBA have prepared, and were there ones in specific? Because I think they prepare tons and tons of FNs.
Yeah, I mean, I think really it depends on sort of how you might. So obviously the commission as a whole has an interest, but I think specifically the fiscal policy work group, you may already be considering this, but one place to start in the work is to sort of look at existing sources and to try to understand not only what they generate currently, but what they might generate through different rates or exemptions as applicable, depending on sort of the structure of the tax. DRA or LBA should be able to tell you if you increase the rate of the interest and dividends tax based on those fiscal notes, how much might it generate? Or if you were to double the deer tax, or change the way that the lottery pays out prizes, based on those fiscal notes, they should be able to give you more insights into how additional revenue might be generated for the purposes of the commission's work.
Okay, that helps a lot. One of the things that I think we're going to talk about these later, the work group, what the work groups talked about in their first meetings last week. But something we did talk about in the fiscal policy meeting was possibly getting a comprehensive database of property assessments across the state by municipality, so that we could. I mean, obviously, the property tax plays a big role currently in education funding, And I'm not making any, prediction of what this commission may recommend, but I think we would probably be looking for some sort of tool that would allow us to model the effects of any change to property tax, and how that would affect a variety of types of properties across the state, and maybe something that's even more granular than the classifications that are used now. For example, residential or commercial. I mean, maybe we're interested in residential less than $1 million, residential $1 million up, and commercial. And I was wondering, is that something that you think we might be able to find through the DRA?
So Doug can correct me if I'm wrong about this, but I think I'm not sure that what the cities and towns report to DRA is sufficiently granular right now, which is to say, if you, to use your example, if you wanted to know if we class property $1 million and up differently than property.
No, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm not that we would class property differently, but just we'd be able to take a look at the effect of income tax on groups of properties across the entire state.
Right. So, but to your point, if you wanted to have a different rate for a higher value of property versus a lower one, I think that the data that the towns report is aggregated. The data that they report to DRA is aggregated. They have the individual values. I don't think it's been transmitted to DRA in a usable way yet.
Okay.
John Beardmore would probably be able to answer this better than we can. But, as far as I know, the DRA does not actually collect, one record for each piece of property from the towns to create a grand list, as it used to be called, because it had been done in the past for a while. But if they did do that, you could then determine what percentage of property fell into different value ranges, but you still wouldn't be able to determine rental property from homeowner, primary residence, and those things, because that's not collected at the local level.
Mm-hmm. Right. Just looking at what sort of tools may be, or what sort of data may be out there where we can do some modeling.
David, if I could interrupt on that.
Yeah.
Just, I have in my hands the DRA annual report, I think it was for 2018. The report divides out properties. This is their report on property values into current use, those with conservation restriction, discretionary easement, on over to residential land, commercial, industrial. And these are aggregate numbers by town. Pretty useful data, I think. And maybe not, maybe they don't have, I don't know. I suspect they don't, property by property, but they've got the aggregates. And that's probably what we need to have. And in terms of figuring all this out, obviously the first stop is with Commissioner Stepp, and then maybe our consultant can help. But I think there's a lot of good data there.
Oh yeah. No, thanks for sending that report over, and I think I forwarded it on to Bruce so that we could put that up on as a work group resource on the commission website. But that's a very good report.
Mr. Chairman, if I might, I think there's also a tool that might be of value to the group as a whole. The New Hampshire Public Finance Consortium compiles that information and has a sort of, I don't want to call it a searchable database, but sort of a data tool where you can pick a town and look across multiple years worth of data that may, help people gain some insights.
So that's New Hampshire
Public Finance Consortium.
Public Finance Consortium. Great. We will check into that. Thanks very much. Questions for Doug and for Jeff? Yes, Dick.
Yeah, getting to the free and reduced price lunch data, and the quest for good data on levels of poverty and or low income in a particular place. One of the concerns that I've had in relying on free and reduced price lunch data is that there's been some movement away from making available lunches and meals to students on the basis of that kind of eligibility determination. And I think in some places the movement has been to just provide it. And so it's made me nervous about a system that's reliant on the free and reduced price lunch data. And yet I think what I'm hearing is that's the only data that's available. Is that right?
Yeah, in a way, you're right. So I think there's one, maybe more districts in New Hampshire that provide free meals to all students, in which case they don't need to collect that information. But it is the one piece of information right now that is collected that it has any reasonable way to say this is a measure of the income of the families that the kids in the school are coming from.
Thank you.
So on that note, Doug, since you indicated that as students go into high school, there is a hesitancy on their part to basically utilize that free and reduced option for them. Is there anywhere, has anybody looked at the issue of the percent of students who were using that in elementary school and project that same percentile as you move into the high school so that you have some kind of a consistent look at that as a marker?
I don't know of anybody that has done that. It could be done. Where it affects, where the effect is most pronounced is in the high school only school districts or high school and middle school districts. So Exeter Regional is an example of one where you could take all of the feeding schools, the elementary schools that feed that district, and find out what the total percentage of the elementary kids were that were involved in free and reduced lunch and compare that to the high school. I'm sure you'd find the high school percentages being lower. You could, I suppose, say we'll use those lower ones in lieu of the actual applications at the high school level, but I don't know anybody who's actually ever done it. The data's available.
Good. Jay, did you have a question?
It's along the same lines. I know that the data is not as granular as we'd like. It doesn't slide from 0 to 100%. There's at around 50%, a school district's considered 100% free and reduced. There is that kind of cutoff, and I don't want to misrepresent it, so take this as a vague. The point is, there are levels of free and reduced that are greater than what the data would show, and it's unfortunate about using that as a marker. It's a good indicator, but it won't separate a poor district from the poorest district, I guess is what the summary.
I make one quick comment on that, and that is, you're right. This number of the free and reduced numbers are estimates. They're not perfect, but you need to be careful when, let's say, and I've seen this, if for districts that have more than 50% of their students receiving free and reduced meals, then we're going to increase the amount per pupil in a formula by a certain amount, okay? And this has been proposed. Rick Ladd and I got into this discussion in the last session. The problem with that, when you have this so-called cliff effect, you reach this point and all of a sudden you get a lot more per pupil. That puts very strange incentives in the administration to go find that last pupil that puts them over the threshold, and suddenly they get $20,000 more. So what you need to do if you're going to use, you need to have it on a sliding scale, that the value, and Rick had a bill that did that. So you can talk to him. Fortunately, he's not on today, but be careful about the cliff effect. If you decide schools below this percentage get X and schools above this percentage get Y, all of a sudden that borderline becomes a very strange place for administrators to have to deal with.
Yeah, and that's why this last round of biennial budget, we went up, and it was 46% was the top end measured number. And so we slid it up to that as a percentage of 46 or full. And avoided that cliff effect, but it was that experience that just tips me off to, you're right about, you try to get to the last number, whatever you set that number at, 46 or whatever, and yet you can't really separate a poor community from the poorest communities, and that was my other point. And I guess it just says these indicators that we want to use for relative poverty need to be multiple data points, right? I mean, we can't rely on a single data point to determine the opportunities or disparities in a community.
Right, great. Chris, yeah.
Well, it seems to me that, and I know this is, all these are imperfect, right? But the Title I allocations, which are, I believe, based on census, are the across the board standard for poverty. And even now, even more important with the CARES Act, when you see, all the money being distributed, or a good portion of the money being distributed nationally, federal government through the states, is really based on poverty, based on the Title I allocation. So the largest way that the feds allocate resources are all based on that, which I believe always has derived from the census. So imperfect as that may be, it does seem like we'd want to be consistent with how the largest shares of federal dollars for all kinds of purposes are allocated.
Let me comment, Chris. I actually don't know exactly how the Title I figures are derived, but if they are used from the American Community Survey, as I was pointing out, then it's okay for large communities, for large counties and cities. But when you come down to the fine subdivision in New Hampshire of towns, the data there just is not solid enough to use. And if Title I's using it, they're using it. There's nothing we can do about that. But all I was trying to present was, be sure you understand how good the data is.
Great. What
I think there could be an argument for, as Jay was saying, looking at that data with also an eye to TANF data and some of the other indicators of poverty that could apply corrections in really small cases. But most of the districts in this country are small, so I think we need to look into that a little bit more, since that is the standard for how things are allocated.
I think we do need to figure out what the Title I allocation is based on. I vaguely remember that we looked at that and rejected it for some reason. I cannot remember. So maybe we can dig into it a little.
Okay, great. Thanks, Iris. Thanks, Chris. Any more questions on that line? Yes, Bill.
I have, thank you very much for your presentation, Doug and Jeff. Two databases that I've come across, and I want to get your thoughts on it for the group. One is the National Center for Education Statistics, the federal database, US DOE. They have a lot of data that compares across the country, and also the digest of education that comes out from that NCES group. And the second is local, that's appeared recently, Reaching Higher, the local organization that I know you guys are very familiar with. They're also trying to put together a database that allows some assessment of correlations between poverty, parental, educational attainment, and things like that, and outcome. Just if you guys have worked with either of those databases, I'd be interested in whether you think those are useful for our effort, or if there's some obvious flaw.
Let me start with the simple one, the National Center for Educational Statistics. What they do is they collect reports from the state departments. So whatever they have from New Hampshire came from the DOE, and they will have collected it from other states. So you can make state by state comparisons, but again, be careful about understanding what's in the data element. So one of the reasons that the New Hampshire Department of Education doesn't include transportation in its per pupil spending is because the National Center of Educational Statistics says don't include that, so we can make comparisons across all the states. So they can do the comparisons across the states for you with their definitions, but just know what's in them and what's not in them. The second, the Reaching Higher, we've worked with Reaching Higher. I've seen their presentation that I guess they're going to make in a week to the work group. And they're working off of that same list of data that I included in two of the slides of what the Department of Education puts together. So they're working off the department's data, and so is the National Center. And I just want to make sure that as people review data from either of those sources, that they understand what was in it and what wasn't in it.
Thank you.
Okay, great. Anybody else have any questions? John Beardmore, you didn't have a question? Anybody else anything further while we're talking with Doug and Jeff? Can you guys stay on with our meeting?
Certainly.
Yeah, I can stay.
That would be great, and terrific. Let's just see where we're at right now. Does anybody need a break? Should we take like a 4-minute break? Bruce, what do you think?
Yeah, I think on these 2-hour Zoom calls, a quick bio break in the middle is a good idea to keep us fresh, and then we'll get right back into the next discussion topic.
Okay, so why don't we take a 4-minute recess then?
3:06 at 3:10, we're going to get right back onto it.
All right, sounds good. So don't log off, just stay, yeah, there we go.
All right, it's 3:10. Let's go.
All right. Welcome back. All right, we are pivoting now into our RFP review team's recommendation based on the work that the review team conducted. So I'm gonna give, let's see, I think shortly before this meeting, Bruce sent out an email to all the commission members that had the report from our committee, and I'm just gonna try to share that now. Let's see, can people see that? Bruce, did that come up? All right, great.
Yes.
So so I'm just going to read. It's a a short memo, but I'm just going to read a couple of things so that for the benefit of people who are listening in, and this what after the commission sees this today at this meeting, it'll be posted up on the commission website as well. But the report goes like this. Review committee members are Luno, Khan, Myler, Dwyer, who abstained from voting, Ames, and Ladd. And it starts with a little bit of process. The RFP was released March 19th, 2020. Proposals were received on April 24th. The RFP yielded 2 applications from nationally recognized research firms, American Institutes of Research, or otherwise known as AIR, and Augenblick, Palich and Associates, along with Wested. And they were together, so that's APA Wested. Interviews were conducted with principal. Oh, I've got the version that had principal not spelled correctly. Principal teams from both firms on May 1st, 2020. Reference checks were conducted on May 5th and May 6th via Zoom by Luno and Mallory. With 3 clients identified by each firm. The review committee met via Zoom on May 8th to discuss the 2 proposals and develop its recommendation to the full commission. In summary, both proposals were strong and comparable in terms of cost and qualifications. Both firms demonstrated the ability to conduct the requested work in the time allotted. Following a review of the proposals, interviews, and reference checks, the review team determined that AIR would be the best choice for carrying out the work as described in the RFP. And we talk a little bit about why we felt the AIR proposal was particularly well suited for the commission's work, and what the commission recommends. I'm sorry, what the review team recommends the commission to enter into contract negotiations with AIR. So that's where we are at right now in terms of what's before the commission now. It's and I would sort of start with a procedural question. We're not approving a contract with a research vendor because we still have to negotiate and bring that contract before the commission at a later date, and we would like to do this as soon as possible. But we would like to, members of the review team would like to be here to answer questions that members of the commission may have, and seek the commission's, I guess it would be take the commission's temperature and seek their general authority to move in the direction of negotiating a contract, and such contract would certainly be subject to the approval of the full commission. Bruce, does that?
Yeah, before you take questions, you might want to say a little bit about how we're going to treat this conversation. Obviously, it's a public conversation at this point. Some elements of the proposals will remain confidential until we have a contract in hand, at which time the contract, of course, will be made public, and the proposal from the from AIR will be made public at that point as well. I don't know all the fine lines there, but I just wanted to raise that there may be some aspects here that want to continue to respect the confidentiality of the process with.
Right. No, thanks for bringing that up, Bruce. And so, feel free to ask a question. I think members of the review team will have to determine whether that's something that really sort of breaks into the confidential aspect of these things. But I think we can certainly give you high level rationale as is laid out in the memo as to why the review team is recommending this direction. Iris.
Thanks. I have sort of a two-part question. I wanted to know more about the difference in approach that each was going to take to the actual task at hand. And I also wondered, the AIR group, several of its principals seem to be experts in something called the state cost function model. And I wondered whether that was a model that they thought what should be a centerpiece of our attention, or whether they were more open and had expertise in other possibilities.
Sure. Thanks, Iris, for your question. I'll take a stab at that. I think both teams, actually, both respondents had showed experience and use in different modeling functions for school funding. So I think one group may have showed certain maybe more attention or more use of a particular model than another group. I think with respect to AIR, it had a lot to it had to do with AIR's experience, and I think we write about this in the memo. Having worked with states that had that really faced similar challenges to what New Hampshire's facing right now, and we felt that that experience was going to be relevant for the commission's work. Mel or Jay or Bruce?
My 2 cents was my sense was I thought that the team from AIR was more experienced, and that they were more seasoned than the IVA folks. Also, the issue is of a proximity. The other group is a Western group, and I was concerned anyway of their availability to basically be here and work with us. One of their chief principals is in Vermont, was key in a recent study that they have done over in Vermont. And so I thought that was important. They also talked a little bit about how they dealt with the legislature and providing data that was very understandable, and a lot of follow through. And I think David and Bruce can speak to this as they deal with the reference checks, but there was a ton of follow through and a real commitment to ensuring that the work that they have done, that they will do for us, and the work that we will do will be successful.
Yeah, Mel, thanks. I think it's particularly important to say that both proposals were strong, and so with that as a starting point, and that the references, all of the references for both were also very, very positive, and there's no doubt that any state relying on either one of these research firms would have both commitment to the project as well as seeing it through to legislative conclusion. So, but I agree with what Mel.
David, I'd also add too. This was a unanimous recommendation from the screening committee.
Bruce, did you, or
Yeah, I'll just comment briefly on Iris's question about approaches and difference in approaches. There was a greater emphasis, there was a more of an emphasis in this AIR proposal on cost function. That is, what do you get for your dollar? And that's my simplistic, lay language for that, but in a technical fashion. And their principals, particularly Bruce Baker and Jesse Levin, are experts in that and have excellent national comparative data to help us understand in New Hampshire how other states have invested particular dollars for particular purposes. The other kind of approach that both firms are comfortable with and that APA emphasized somewhat more is professional judgment. We felt for our purposes and the timeline that we're operating within, this focus on costing the different components of adequacy as we define adequacy for 2020 and going forward would be well served again by AIR. And you may recall, members may recall, in our very early, one of our second or third meeting, when Dan Thatcher presented to us the various methodologies used by adequacy and funding studies across the country. These were included in that presentation, and so we have some understanding of the pros and cons of each. I guess I also want to emphasize our confidence that, in this case, AIR will be effective in terms of producing materials that the general public will be able to respond to when we move to our public engagement phase of this work, and that legislators will be able to interact with after the report is due to us. Their report is due to us August 31st. There was both a willingness and, in fact, a specific budgeted approach to the continuing consultation with the commission, at least up until December 1st, if not beyond. So those are parts of the positives.
Maybe I could add something. Yeah, well, seconding all that's been said, and the first point is two very strong proposals, and we're lucky in that regard. And secondly, so you have to make a judgment. The team put forward by AIR is superb, and more seasoned was, I think it was Mel maybe who used that expression. That is correct, but there should be no connotation of rigidity. This is a team that will respond and work with us, and we're searching for that, and I think all of us felt that was true. They're also very committed to their work. They care about what they're working on: school finance, public schools, working towards something better, and that came through. They're also close at hand. That was mentioned. One of their key members is just over in Vermont, in the University of Vermont, and they will be, I suppose, if the pandemic allows, here in New Hampshire to help us out. But they're close by, and they have a familiarity with circumstances like those in New Hampshire. They've been deep into Vermont's situation, which is a rural state, not unlike, but quite different from ours. And so I came away from it feeling that this group could be very helpful. The other group could be very helpful, but there's a degree difference that led me, and I led everybody else on the committee. It was amazing how we all came together on this to go for this team.
Dave, can I just add a word to Iris's question about methodology? I think it's important not to read too much into the words cost function in their bios, because the other thing, they did propose also to do analyses of outcomes, disparities in outcomes, as well as analyses of disparities in educational opportunities, the input side, in addition to looking at the modeling. So I wouldn't want to have it seem as if those were not a part of the work.
Great. Thanks, Chris. Jay, do you want to add anything?
No, I think that you've summed it up fine. I like the group that we're going to be working with. I think that they match up well with the discussions we've had. And I think that their strengths are going to be in the very short window that we have for arriving at recommendations. I think they will get there. They'll help us accelerate that process because of who they are and how they are approaching the study in a very quantitative way. And I think it'll be an advantage for us.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Great, thanks, Jay. Anybody, any questions that we can try to get answered? Bill?
Yes, sir. Thanks to the screening team. It sounds like a great exercise, and I wholeheartedly support the direction you're moving in. Dave, as you described this, you talked about some confidential items, and Bruce, things that should remain confidential. Obviously the public may listen in to these things. I think if you could just describe or list briefly the categories of items, the types of items, without disclosing anything that are appropriately maintained as confidential in this. And also, I'm assuming price might be one of those items, certainly that the public might be interested in, and that maybe you could just summarize why that also should be maintained as confidential at this point until it comes before the commission and goes through a negotiation. I just wanted to put that out there in listening to your description. Thank you.
Sure. I mean, I'll take a crack at the start of this. That moving forward to negotiate a contract, and whether we're doing that as the RFP review team or the executive committee team, that's up to us to discuss which subgroup wants to work and put that together. But negotiate a contract needs to obviously be done in confidence with the until we've got something that tentatively we all agree to, and we can take it back to the commission for to authorize that. And we don't want to sort of put any put any sort of dollar expectation on or cost expectation on the table right now, other than that both were comparable, and that the RFP is a public document, and basically I think caps the project at, was it $160,000, Bruce? I think that was the amount. So that should sort of like lay out the scope of items there. I think one or both of the proposals may have some confidential elements into it, and we'd certainly want to make sure that we're not making public anything that either party want to have remain in confidence. And that's basically it. But when you look at RFP processes, and we've all been involved in them before, both in private sector and public sector, it's important that the process is public. A lot of some of the data that's being discussed is kept confidential. But when it comes to the upfront document, the RFP, and the final result of the work, the contract, both are public documents. So
that's very helpful, Dave. Thank you for that very good description of the process.
I think the other way to think about it is simply that the two proposals are both proprietary. That is, they represent intellectual property from each organization. And as Dave says, at the time that we convert the winning proposal into a contract, that becomes public. I expect that the public would also have access to the winning proposal as a matter of public record as well. The proposal that we're not proceeding with will remain proprietary at this point, unless something changes. But that's essentially that's the distinction we're trying to make here.
David, do you need a motion to move forward now?
You know what? I don't think we need a motion because we're not approving anything. We obviously don't want to, spend time negotiating a contract if the commission doesn't want us to enter into a contract. But I think we've got as Mel's laid out, a unanimous recommendation from the review team, and we've got a proposal, and we've got a contract to do that. I think at this point we don't need a vote, but we need a general, heads nodding. Yep, we're proceeding towards getting towards building a contract, and bring the contract back to the commission to be considered for approval by the commission.
Thank you.
David, I guess just one thought in a temporal sense. We won't be meeting as a full commission until the 26th again. And so for the practical matter, there may be a contract pending the approval of the commission that might enable the commencing of work at risk in advance of the final approval. Is that my perception right?
Yeah, I think you're right. I don't think we're going to need to have any sort of intermediate contract in place. I think the AIR understands that anything taken on right now would be done at risk, but it's probably going to take a week or so to come up with the terms of the contract and get both parties in general accord with that, and then bring that back to the full commission in 2 weeks for its consideration. If it happens earlier than that, and we can notice a meeting for the commission to meet specifically and approve or consider and vote on a contract, we'll go ahead and do that. But I think the 2-week schedule is probably where it's at.
And we'll be meeting, the executive group for the commission will be on a call later tomorrow with AIR to discuss the scope of work and get started. I've had a conversation already today with the principal at AIR, who understands, of course, that we're going to be working at risk for some hopefully short period of time here.
Yeah, there was an understanding in our conversation with actually both groups, but particularly with AIR, dealing with the immediacy of moving forward. And the short time frame that we have here, they understand that. They were eager to get this moving as quickly as possible, should they be selected. So I think Dave's comment about the need to have the elements of the contract hammered out fairly quickly and thoroughly in an immediate way is noted by both parties.
So Dave, let's take a couple of more questions, but let's also move on to the next.
Yep. Yeah, Iris?
It's not really a question. I just thought you were looking for a sense from the whole commission, and just process-wise, it might make you feel more confident entering the negotiation to just have a motion to authorizing negotiations to begin with AIR.
Why don't we go ahead and do that? I think that's fine, and we'll just do a quick roll call on it, and I think that makes a lot of sense. And everybody knows that a contract will be coming back for consideration by the commission most likely.
Then David, I would move to authorize the executive group to move forward in consummating
No, contract negotiations.
right, with AIR immediately.
Okay.
I move
Second.
that.
Second.
Seconded by Barbara. All right, let's just go through further discussion on it. Seeing none, we'll call the roll. Mel Myler.
Yes.
Rick Ladd's not here. Let's see. Dick Ames.
Yes.
Mary Heath.
Yes.
Jay Kahn.
Yes.
John Morgan.
Yes. Multiple.
That was a yes.
Underage voting going on.
So, Corinne Cascadden.
Yes.
Jane Bergeron.
Yes.
David Ryan.
Yes.
Iris Estabrook.
Yes.
John Beardmore.
Yep.
Bill Ardinger.
Yes.
Susan Huard.
Yes.
Barbara Tremblay.
Yes.
Chris Dwyer.
Yes.
Val Zanchuk.
Yes.
All right. We got what we need. Executive committee will proceed to work with Bruce and negotiate a contract with AIR. All right. With that, we're shifting into work group reports. So work groups met on Thursday last week, 10 to noon, 1 to 3, and 3 to 5. And it will certainly try to be the practice of the work groups to stagger the meetings, allowing everybody to attend as many work groups as they want. I think we got strong attendance in all the work groups from members of the public, and we appreciate their attendance at those groups. And what else did I want to just sort of mention? I spacing it, but anyway, we had a good, robust discussion in all of the groups, especially the adequacy distribution group, and that's where we're starting off first. So I'm going to hand it over to Jay.
Thanks, David. Not surprisingly, our first conversation had to do with taxing and appropriations. We have a charge that is available to you on the screen here that we did focus initially to hone in on. Most specifically for your attention, given our previous conversation, is item number 3. Adding a objective to determine the costs of an adequate education. And we developed some tentative meetings, agendas for the next month that will enable us to hone in on the adequate education definition and make some progress on tasks 2 and 3. Task 4, relative to suggesting the framework for distribution, obviously needs to follow from the first 3, as would review and accountability be something that we would pick up along the way, but leave for a summary report. So very formative in our efforts to develop adequate education. We began a conversation about it and have agreed that we will begin to search our revised statutes and look for those that place requirements on local school districts. And we will then probably gauge for ourselves, at least initially with the committee, and then probably engage the entire commission in trying to weigh those requirements as a part of a base adequacy definition. So we started talking about a bushel basket and what goes into that bushel basket. Much like other economic indicators, might like a cost of living or a gross domestic product. What is that bundle of goods that are required for the adequate education requirement to be met by school districts? So we've got an approach, I think, for attacking that, and are going to proceed. Relative to the opportunities and, I should also say, well, relative to the number 2, the opportunities and outcomes, we talked about the I-platform data. Doug Hall just made mention of the data that's available from the Department of Education. But if you do go to the department's website, I encourage you to go to the very bottom of their page and look for I-platform in a glossary of terms that's among 20 or 30 on the bottom of their homepage. And you'll find a variety of both input and outcome data that are available from the department. Input data might say, what are the opportunities that are available for students in that district? And those might include experienced teachers, average class size, those type of input data. The outcomes is focused more on proficiency levels and graduation rates and dropout rates, the other side of that coin. So again, get familiar with it. It is listed there for every school district in the state. Relative to the third task on cost of adequacy, we have a meeting set. So I'll just go through our meetings now and make this more linear in time. On the 18th, our meeting is going to include the Reaching Higher presentation. We're scheduling the Adequacy Distribution Committee in a time frame so that we can overlap in our first hour with the fiscal committee's work and each share in that presentation. So that would be at 2 o'clock on the 18th of May. We've added another meeting on the 21st, a Thursday from 10 to 12, and we intend to invite business officers, school business officers to that meeting. And we're going to work on a list of several that have recently received the Outstanding School Business Officer Awards and engage them in the conversation of what is in the basket today and what isn't that ought to be. So that'll be a conversation on the 21st. The next meeting of the group would not take place until June 1st. And one of the overlapping topics that we see with the fiscal group is relative to understanding our court decisions more fully and where some of the latitude and flexibility is within those decisions for specifically addressing the cost of an adequate education, answering questions of first dollar, last dollar, what needs to be covered through the raising of state funds and the distribution of state funds. So you can see we're trying to work through all three at once and looking forward to the consultants being available to us to validate some of the observations that we're coming up with, in particular and initially with the adequate education definition.
Great. Thanks.
And there are 5 other really talented people from this group who are members of it, so they can feel free to offer further insights.
Anybody on the AWG want to share some more thoughts? Some very spirited discussion.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, great. Jay, thanks very much. Next up, Mel and the Public Engagement Work Group.
Well, we met, and unlike some of the content pieces that both the other 2 work groups have, we had an initial task of dealing with some of the logistical issues of engaging individuals. I'll also say, too, that those of you that will remember Carrie, who is working with us, she has decided to cloister herself for the next 6 weeks as she's preparing for her defense of her PhD, ending that process for us. So in lieu of Carrie, we have Michelle, who is the director of New Hampshire Listens, who's going to be working with this work group as we begin to move forward. We had several tasks to look at, and one of them was a survey that we initially, way back when, had talked about using the UNH Survey Center for one of their quarterly surveys to have some school finance, school funding questions on it. And that was scheduled for June. And we, the group decided that that was too soon. And so we have moved that portion of the survey that would deal with school funding to their September survey. And we will have anywhere from 8 to 10 questions. And we will gather those questions from the group here. So as we get closer to really in the August period, because we need to have those questions ready for the actual September survey, we will be eliciting from both our committee, our work group, plus everybody else on the commission to identify those key questions. Now that leads us into the next issue. The one thing that we are dealing with here this spring was stakeholders. We've identified a whole series of stakeholders. And then the question was, well, how do you, what's the scheme for engaging stakeholders? And we looked at a number of options of how the state is currently organized. And we looked at the Senate map. We looked at the economic map. The one that we came up with was the planning, the regional planning group. There are 9 of them in the state. They are organized, they meet on a regular basis. And so we have decided that we're going to be utilizing these 9 regional planning group from a geographic standpoint. And we are in the process of currently of establishing those stakeholder meetings. Again, we're talking about 2 per region, anywhere from 8 to 12 people per meeting. That would be representative, a cross-section of leadership within that region, both business, school people, etc., to come together in a Zoom format. And if you want a little more about how they do that, I'll have Michelle speak to that. We will have, at our next, on the 18th, we will begin to look at exactly how those have been populated, dates for when they're going to take place, etc. I'm not sure whether the commission is aware or not, but New Hampshire Listens has about 160 trained facilitators across the state that basically do these kinds of engagement meetings on a regular basis. Those individuals will be engaged in that process. We will have by the 14th, which is next Friday, I believe, or next Thursday, the committee, the engagement committee is to give to us some of the questions that they think might be relevant to those particular engage in those particular sessions. And so we hope to have these engage these initial stakeholder groups across the state. Again, if you think about this now, it's 2 of these sessions, nine different regions, 8 to 10 people. So you're talking about a significant number of people who are going to be engaged in these processes. And those will take place sometime mid-June. The next thing we talked about was student voice. Now this is how will we gather the voice of students as it relates to schools, funding of schools, what they're achieving, what they're receiving in schools. We decided to put that off till the fall, because as right now, if you're in a normal school setting, they're beginning to shut schools down. People are beginning to focus of ending the school, and we will pick this up actually in the fall. We've identified some sources for gaining their voice through various organizations that engage students across the state, and we will be dealing with those when we have a chance to get this initial stakeholder spring activity taking place. Then the following thing is the broader group, which will then take place in the fall, and we're holding on that, and we'll be planning that in the next several months. Any members of the committee, feel free to jump in if I missed anything. Michelle, if I missed anything.
I didn't know if any of the other commission members were trying to jump in, because I can't see them all on my screen right now, so I apologize. But if I may, the only other thing that I would share is that we recognize that we'll get different things from people over the arc of the life of the commission, so that in the beginning we're getting sort of a sense of what people think without necessarily new information. In the middle and early fall, there'll be kind of more information that's come from the work groups that we can use to interact with people and get their input and responses on, and their reactions to. And toward the end, we can start to share, in time to get it back to the commission, but share some of the key decisions that are starting to be made and get feedback on that. So throughout the arc of the commission, it gives us a chance to get different kinds of information from different kinds of people. So not just the who and the and what questions to ask, but sort of where we are in the process will help us get thicker information from people.
I think the other thing that we want to do here is that both with all of these engagement processes is trying to build a body politic out there that understands more as a result of their engagement, the issue of school funding. So when we finally come down with some of the scenarios or the recommendations that will be coming out of the commission, there will be a group that's out there that has some ownership to this process, and can have an intelligent conversation, an intelligent dialogue around where we need to go with any recommendations we might come forward with. So that's it, Dave.
Great. Thanks, Mel. Anybody else have anything to add on public engagement? Yeah, I can't see if anybody's got a hand up or not, but if anybody does, please just jump in right now. All right, then we're going to move on to fiscal policy. And Jordan, I don't know if it's, are those the points from, yep, from our,
yeah.
So
I took those from your last minutes. For your most.
Fantastic. I'm gonna hand it over to Jordan. He put together an excellent summary of our work group.
Great. Thanks, everybody. I'll try to keep it brief, being mindful of time, give you the 30,000-foot overview. I will also note that if you ever want to go back to any of these meetings, they are available on the Car Seat Commission website. They're, as you might imagine, big video files. They take me a little while to load, but I typically get them up on the website the next day after the meetings. So feel free to look at that. We also have, I know each of the subcommittees are taking internal notes just for themselves, and I'm sure that they'd be happy to share that with any other members of the commission if you want a little more detail. So with that, yeah, so much like the other groups, you know, our first meeting was kind of all about planning the road ahead. And one of the big things we wanted to do was identify, you know, what are the current revenue sources at the local, state, the federal level, grants, private contributions, what are all the pieces that go into PK to 12 education. And so we started brainstorming, you know, what was out there, looking at some of the data that we'd already collected, thinking about what data we would need to collect and that we'd want to share with our vendor. We reacquainted ourselves with design thinking and how that fits with the fiscal policy group. You know, so what parts of these, you know, are we building from the ground up? You know, what are the tacks that we're taking here? And we really began to orient ourselves around some guiding principles, not our pals, thinking about, in particular, things like equity, fiscal neutrality. You know, how are we constrained and not constrained by previous court rulings? And what are those things that we need to be thinking about as we're moving forward? And, you know, thinking about how does that impact, you know, on, you know, sort of 3, 4, 5 in that list that's in front of us here, you know, identifying what the variable impacts might be, how might we do that? What does equity look like in the context of fiscal policy? What do those distributions look like? And then we outlined our data needs. You know, some of the things that we reviewed here today, the DRA and DOE data. We really, one thing we want to do as a group.
Hi, Jim. How are you?
Is
good.
We wanted to look at the history of changes to adequacy and the spending formula over the last 20, 25 years. What are some of those inflection points? How can we model, you know, if, for instance, you know, we've talked about the 2008 study, you know, some of those were implemented fully. What might that look like today? How can we figure that out? Where can we see those changes? And then also thinking pretty deeply about swept data, what it can tell us and not tell us, how we want to use that. We also worked to identify who else we'd like to get input and data from moving forward with the commission. As mentioned, Reaching Higher is going to be doing a joint presentation for the adequacy and fiscal policy work groups next Monday. And then we also talked a lot about A, B, and C class properties, how we might define that. And we determined we might bring in Senator Gaida soon to talk to us about what the Senate was thinking when they proposed that, and making sure that we're you know, thinking about what the intent was behind the statute as we move forward. And yeah, that's a pretty high level summary, but that's mainly what our conversation consisted of.
Thanks, Jordan. I think you captured that very well. And the only thing I wanted to sort of highlight on it was basically, as you talked about, guiding principles, and the idea of fiscal neutrality is something that has come up in many court decisions across the country, and I think it's something like that may help us consider our or help us judge the fiscal policy part of what this commission does, what this work group recommends, because there's the funding of adequacy part, but then there's also the fiscal policy part. And I think this is something that Bill Ardinger has also talked about. And anyway, the fiscal neutrality principle really does cut into to both those areas. So that's something we're going to be exploring some more. Anyway, I wanted to any questions on the fiscal policy work group, or anybody want to add anything that was there on the group? Dick or Bruce? We're good. All right, we're gonna keep going in the remaining 2 minutes. Let's talk a little bit about the upcoming calendar, and I know we've thrown a lot of dates out today. So Bruce will be sending around updated things, but at least what to have on your radar screen right now. May 11th, that's today, commission meeting. Next thing, May 18th, that's a week from today, that's work group meetings. So May 21st, that's also next week. That's, let's see, that's Thursday next week. And also work group meetings, tentative work group meetings, but we will we'll have them schedule and have them available for the work groups. And then May 26th, so that's a Tuesday. Monday's Memorial Day, so May 26th, that'll be a full commission meeting, and that will be the meeting that so it'll be our next full commission meeting. We hope to have a contract for the commission to review, so, and act on should they wish. So anyway, more detail on the calendar will be coming out, but that's sort of it in a nutshell right now. Yeah, when we have, I see Bruce has been scrolling up some of the work group. We have been tentatively scheduling some people we may want to meet with at the various work group meetings and for commission meetings too. So all of that will be sent out. 4 o'clock.
Dave, I just think it's worth noting that tentatively, again, we have to get all these invitations out the door. I do tomorrow. But we would like to have the commissioners of education and DRA come to us, hopefully for our June 8th meeting, full commission meeting, specifically to help us understand at this point what we know about, at that point, what we know about the impact of COVID on the educational system and on revenues that are out there. Obviously, that's a moving target, but we do want, given the time that we're in, historically, we want to be sure that the commission's work is takes into account, is cognizant of the immediate effects of the pandemic on the education system, and then, of course, what that might look like, both in terms of activities on the part of public schools and the revenues they have access to going forward. But this is a document. This is a work in progress, but I'll get this out to folks, so everybody has this in front of them. Again, subject to availability of the folks that we'll be inviting and other circumstances as they come up, which this commission's now getting to be expert at, is going with the flow.
Yeah, Bruce, I guess I just, with tax revenues not really being received until June 15th, I guess I understand the urgency of wanting to have that conversation, but those commissioners might be a good approach too, to offer to them, and what would be the best timing for them to come to the commission. We don't need to make them feel uneasy with projections that just aren't very useful at that point in time.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
I remembered we added a couple of documents to and Bruce and Jordan, I maybe as we start to add documents to the contents on the webpage, maybe you just highlight when something's been added, just so that it's a pretty impressive list of documents that's out there now. One of them, we've added the 2006 Governor's Commission that looked at school formulas, and that's going to be added. So that seemed to be a helpful guide that was referred to in our adequacy discussion, in addition to the 2008 study that is out there that developed the idea of an adequate education and the cost for it. We're trying to update that and take a look at that in the next couple of meetings that the group's going to have.
Terrific. Anybody else have anything for the good of the cause that they want to bring up right now? It's 4:04. We're pretty close. So are we good, Bruce?
We're good, and I just want to say I am so impressed and gratified to be working with this group of folks in the middle of the circumstances that we're all in. The level of commitment and availability and time and thoughtfulness here is just fabulous. That's all I can say. I'm just grateful for all of you, leadership especially. But I didn't know when we began this process that this is the way we were going to be doing it. And as we now have, begun to peel the layers of this onion back, it's a pretty complicated onion, and the range of expertise and perspectives in this group is a huge strength for us. So thanks very much. I just wanted to say that.
Thanks, Bruce. Yeah, we couldn't have a better team here. So thank you all very, very much. I hope you and your families and friends and neighbors continue to be healthy and active and safe, and look forward to seeing everybody soon.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thanks.